the science is right. That asteroid did come from a watery world with life on it. It's just not so ancient. It's about 6 to 10,000 years old from the creation event.
The same day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened.
Welcome to this episode of Hydroplate Theory University with Hydroplate Theory experts Kevin Lee and Bill Wells.
But we want to just welcome you to this 5th episode of HPT University, where we're going to be talking about asteroids today. And I'm going to walk it through in a PowerPoint program, and we're going to help educate, because people have told me in the past, Kevin, you got to slow down and kind of help us get there. So that's my mission today. And even though the chapter in Walt Brown's book is asteroids, meteorites, and trans-Neptunian objects, we're going to really concentrate on asteroids for reasons that are going to become clear in this presentation, because there's news this week about a meteorite that came in, crashed through a roof of a house, and the building blocks of life are coming to Earth. Well, there's an alternate contour opinion that we're going to be sharing with you today. So today is HPT University 5th podcast. July 21st, 2026 is when we're recording. It'll be up next week. And it introduces these chapters taken from In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood, 9th edition of Dr. Brown's book. And what does the Bible say about them? In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, one day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And so, this is our foundational verse of this whole ministry, is Genesis 7:11 through 12. It is God telling us how the flood of Noah occurred. Water underneath the crust ruptured up and came up to become global rainfall and everything that we've emphasized in the previous podcasts. And so once again, what the Bible tells us is something like this happens. The crust ruptured, 46,000 mile crack around the earth, and there would have been things jettisoning. Some of it only comes up so far, comes back as rain. Some goes into space, which is what our topic is today. So the origin of comets and asteroids, and this is from In the Beginning, 9th edition, and it starts out with this statement: the fountains of the great deep launched rocks, muddy water, into space. So some of that energy of the supercritical water escaping from underneath the crust in the subterranean, what Walt calls the subterranean chambers, some of it was so explosive, turning its thermal energy into kinetic energy, that it was able to entrain rock and debris from the sides of the crust and even material from the mantle, and entrain that with the escaping supercritical water and shoot it up into space. So launch rocks and muddy water into space. The rocks, as rocks, moved away from the Earth. Earth's gravity became less significant to them, and the gravity of nearby rocks became increasingly significant. So this is a hard concept for people on Earth that haven't had orbital physics or even physics science, is that my mass has a certain amount of gravity. The Earth's mass has a certain amount of gravity, and obviously a lot more because it's got so much more mass. But once you get away from the Earth, the Earth's gravity effect on debris that would be jettisoned into space gets less and less and less. And so then any rocks that were pulverized into space in the same direction with the same velocity, as they're moving away from the Earth, now the mass of those several ton rocks actually has the ability to pull other rocks close to it. But there's one other secret ingredient that's necessary, and that is an atmosphere of water and even some of the atmosphere from the Earth, that those water and atmosphere molecules, they're able to slow down the relative motion between that debris so it can all come together. And that's why this is what's happening from a gravity standpoint. This is an engineer, it was Brian Nichol that made this animation. He's an engineer. And so Earth has a gravity well. Anything that gets close to its gravity well rim is going to come down to the Earth. And so this is some of the escaping debris and water from Earth came up and came back down as global rainfall. Some of it went up higher, maybe even into space, but whatever goes up must come down still applies to that second bit of debris that went up. And that explains the frozen mammoths. When we get to the mammoth chapter, some of that debris went up and got very cold, came down and buried mammoths and everything else all over the world, and we'll talk about that in the mammoth chapter. But some of it got entrained with enough velocity to get out of the Earth's gravity well. And as a result, that debris, pulsed debris, ends up getting into the sun's gravity well, which is much larger. And so now it's going to go into its own orbits around the sun. These are all absolutely understood laws of physics that have nothing to do with just HPT. It has to do with every space program we send up and everything. People that are engineers know this to be true. And so that one comes up, it leaves the Earth, and it goes into orbits around the sun. The more energy it has, the more elliptical those orbits will be as they leave the sun, going around the sun. They'll be more and further out the more energy they have. But even if it just barely gets out of Earth's gravity, it's going to go into orbits around the sun. Then, Walt says, consequently, many rocks, assisted by their mutual gravity and surrounding clouds of water vapor that produced aerobraking, and they call that, running into other molecules of air and water, it's called aerobraking. If you're driving at 1,000 miles an hour up in space, you stick your your arm out the window, you feel nothing. If you stick your arm out the window, if you could, in 1,000 miles here on Earth, you're going to burn your arm up from the molecules of air hitting your arm. And the same is true in space. If you have an atmosphere, things that are moving are going to be slowing. They're going to feel the effect of the wind as if the way we feel it when you stick your arm out. Produced aerobraking, merging to become asteroids. If there's just a rock by itself in space, they're called meteoroids. A rock in orbit around the sun by itself is called a meteoroid. So drag forces caused by water vapor and thrust forces produced by the radiometer effect, which we'll get into in the details when we come back to do this chapter in detail, affect concentrated most smaller asteroids in what is now the asteroid belt. And this is the asteroid belt. You look at each one of those white dots is a asteroid. And the greens off to the, when you look over here, those are asteroids. They're called Trojan asteroids. And these are asteroids. And there's a reason why they're in these two Lagrange points that we'll talk about later. But they're concentrated. Most of the asteroid belt is between Mars right here and Jupiter. And that's where the asteroid belt exists. And this is another view from space. And you would have had tons and tons of Earth's debris that reached escape velocity. And then here is the atmosphere. This picture is trying to show the atmosphere, big rocks with little rocks and littler rocks going through space that would have all come together to become a loosely held together asteroid or comet. The only difference really between comets and asteroids is the ejection velocity and the amount of water that stayed with the item. And then this is really the key. This is what puzzles evolutionary-minded astronomers, because they look at the way asteroids and comets are now and they don't see an atmosphere. And so they tried to explain how they came to be, thinking they've been the way they've been for billions of years. And what they see now is there's no atmosphere. But we know as hydroplate theory people that atmosphere, those water molecules are not going to stay with the asteroids. They don't have enough gravity to hold it there. So over time, the solar winds blew the atmosphere away from most of the asteroids and TNOs, creating a puzzle that evolutionists can't solve. And I'll explain, proof of that they can't explain it is a conversation I had with a doctorate in planetary science. So we'll talk about that later. But so this is the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. 1.1 to 1.9 million asteroids larger than a kilometer. And there's millions of smaller space rocks also in this region. So the Earth just blew tons of material up into space that ended up in the asteroid belt. And you might say, well, Kevin, how can it go off elliptically and end up in the asteroid belt? And the answer to that is a full presentation on YouTube by Brian Nichol. And hopefully we can put up a QR code for this. But if you just type in on a YouTube channel search, you go Brian, B-R-Y-A-N, Nichol, hydroplate theory, then click on his icon for his station, and you're going to be looking at the one that says Origin of Comets, Asteroids. And he shows in animations by known laws of physics and thrust forces that were at play while these asteroids had an atmosphere of water, how they ended up in the asteroid belt and why they most of them stopped from going further than that. And just another, if you are in your car and you're driving and you had totally frictionless wheels, I mean, there's no friction between your wheels and the pavement, and you turn the engine off while you're driving here on Earth, you're slowing down because of aerobraking. If you're in space and somehow you had a road you could drive on in space and you could turn your car off and you're going for the next million years. You don't really have anything that's going to slow you down except the solar wind, which is a very small force. And if you're driving away from the sun, the solar wind is only going to help you do so. So the aerobraking is critical. And I'll get back to Dr. Thomas here later on, but I'm glad that helped. And so here again, tens of thousands more asteroids are in elliptical orbits. Now these are the ones, they're not in the asteroid belt, but they're in elliptical orbits around the sun, and they cross the orbital paths of planets, which is why sometimes they crash into planets, and why there's billions of dollars being spent to scan the skies, the space skies, looking for one that has an asteroid or a comet that has Earth's name on it, because these orbits are changing all the time because they run into gravitational perturbations. They get close to something and their orbit changes, and so all of a sudden we can go, whoa, something's coming at us. There's 43,000 known near-Earth objects, and they're looking to see if any of them is going to have an orbit that could someday hit the Earth. So in this next slide, which is extremely important because this slide by itself, which is a documentation of the facts of asteroid spin rates, should have made everybody realize that the bigger asteroids are actually floating rock piles. Hydroplate theory advocates have been saying that since 2001 when the 7th edition came out. And so I'm going to try and explain why we should be able to make that determination. This line down here is the size of the asteroid, so you're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is the spin rate. On the left-hand axis, it's the vertical axis. It's spinning faster and faster and faster. And notice that a rock that is spinning fast is only found in this area. As soon as you get greater than 200 meters in size, they're all spinning at a rate that they could be a floating rock pile. Because you can be a floating rock pile in this area, you cannot be a floating rock pile in this area, because if you are a rock pile spinning this fast, you've thrown all the debris off. You're not even an asteroid because all the debris would be flying off like a merry-go-round that's going so fast that you can't stay on it. And so this area is completely empty, which should have told astronomers bigger asteroids are floating rock piles. But they didn't believe that was true because how do you have a floating rock pile come together in the vacuum of space, which they to this day can't explain. And so they now know, and they will say, and they will teach that asteroids are floating rock piles because every time they go to an asteroid, they find out that's true. But not because they can explain. Only the hydroplate theory can explain floating rock piles. And again, I talked to a professor about this in April. So rapidly spinning asteroids, this is figure 184 in Walt's book, that figure that we're just looking at. Clumps of rock in space held together only by their weak mutual gravity will fly apart if they spin faster than 10 times a day. And Walt's a little bit behind the times here, and we're going to explain that here in a minute. It says asteroids larger than 200 meters across never spin faster than 10 times a day. So those bodies may be clusters of loose rocks. And we now, it's not maybe, they are. Loose clusters of loose rocks. Asteroids smaller than 200 meters often spin hundreds of times a day. Therefore, they must be solid rocks. And they are. Those ones that we circled up in the top left of that figure, they are solid rocks. So then what Walt says is, how could solid rocks drifting in space have formed? They don't answer. The astronomers can't figure it out. Had they formed from dust or pebble-sized grains, impacts by other particles would have scattered the merged but weakly held together particles. Consequently, these bodies must be fragments of a much larger body, such as a planet that came together because of aerobraking into the debris piles that are now making up comets, asteroids, and TNOs. And so Walt made a prediction that asteroids spinning faster than 10 rotations per day will be found to be single, well-rounded rock. And it's not really too much of a prediction to say that they'll be single rocks, because they are. Because if they spin faster, they would get rid of, if they had rocks on its surface, they would have spun off. But the real prediction is well-rounded rocks. And how did they get rounded? Because when they got jettisoned from the Earth by the fountains of the Great Deep, they were smashing into each other and rounding off just like river rock takes off the sharp edges. Now, there is an update that in 2025, they found an asteroid using a Vera C. Rubin observatory, which is, again, looking for asteroids that could be colliding with Earth someday. So it's much... and it's all hooked up to AI computers and everything, and they're sniffing out. And they found one, and actually there's a couple of them around. The biggest one is 710 meters. So that means, based on the hydroplate theory, the largest chunk of rock that was jettisoned from the Earth was 710 meters, as we are right now. They just found this out. All the millions that they've seen, they found one that's or a couple of them that's greater than 200 meters. And there's an explanation from the hydroplate theory how something that big could have been ejected as a solid rock into space. So once again, hydroplate theory explains this graph. And asteroids are usually defined. Now we're going to define the different terms going to be used in this chapter. Asteroids, and this is NASA definition, asteroids are usually defined as being larger than 1 meter in diameter. Anything that's floating up in space that's larger than 1 meter in diameter. Free-floating rocky objects smaller than asteroids are called meteoroids. And those are the kind of things that often hit the Earth when we see a meteor shower. A piece of comet, asteroid, or meteoroid that enters our atmosphere becomes a meteor. And if it survives to hit the Earth, it becomes a meteorite. And asteroids large enough to become round through hydrostatic equilibrium are called dwarf planets. So In other words, if a debris pile got jettisoned from the Earth that was huge, it was a huge pulse debris pile that made it get to be several hundred meters in diameter, then it's going to be not even several hundred meters, 150 meters, it can round things off. But if it has enough gravity to make itself round, by the laws of gravity, the laws of physics, anything that is in space or anywhere that's not round wants to be round. If it's big enough and has enough gravity, then it's going to be able to force it to be round. Even the Earth today, the earthquakes, when we get to the earthquake chapter, the reason why we have earthquakes is the Earth is still trying to recover from the cataclysm of Noah's flood and trying to fill in the low gravity areas, the low mass areas, which are over in the Pacific Ocean. So the mass of the Earth is having slight movements to fill up those mass deficiencies in the Pacific. And every once in a while, it's able to break the resistant forces of the fault lines to cause an earthquake. If the Earth was around for millions of years, there would be no earthquakes.
If you're enjoying Hydroplate Theory University, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel by searching Hydroplate Theory University and clicking our official logo. We're organizing the series into playlists for each chapter of Dr. Walt Brown's book. Right now, we're covering the chapter overviews, and once those are complete, we'll come back and explore each chapter in greater depth. You can also find every episode and chapter at hptuniversity.com. We're still finishing a few parts of the website, but everything will be there soon. Now, let's get back to Hydroplate Theory University.
And this is something, even the fact that if an asteroid's big enough to be round by the gravity forces, the hydrostatic equilibrium forces, they become dwarf planets. And the Earth is big enough to become round, but the flat earthers, think of this. We know Pluto's round, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury. They're all round because of the laws of physics makes them round. But flat earthers ignore the laws of physics and think that somehow the Earth is able to stay flat when gravity will not allow something our size to be a flat disk in space. So here is an actual picture taken by the OSIRIS-REx probe of the NASA program. And by the way, Bennu is not in Walt's book because Bennu came after he stopped his research. But what does that look like to you? Here is a relatively small asteroid that is in a spherical shape, spinning on its axis, and you can tell where its axis is because the equator area, this is the equator area here, and it's bulging because even though it's not spinning fast enough to cause the debris to fly off, it's spinning fast enough to give an equatorial bulge, and it's a floating rock pile. Look at the amount of rocks that are on the surface and actually inside Bennu, if we could see it. And this is what they found on Bennu.
Breaking space news, absolutely insane and announced this morning. Scientists sent a spacecraft to an asteroid 63 million kilometers away, grabbed a chunk of it and brought it back to Earth. And they've analyzed the sample, and the results of what is on this asteroid are in. Basically, scientists think that this asteroid used to be part of a much bigger object like an ancient planet or moon in the early solar system, and this chunk broke off from it. On Earth, life uses these 20 amino acids to create proteins. They found 14 of these 20 amino acids on this asteroid. So these 5 nucleotide bases used to make DNA and RNA? Guess how many of these 5 were discovered on the asteroid? All of them. They found all 5 of the building blocks for DNA and RNA on this asteroid. They also found 11 different minerals that form as water-containing salt evaporates. Salt water. It's also rich in carbon, nitrogen, and other organic compounds that are essential to life as we know it. All of this means that the object that this asteroid came from had the building blocks for life and probably a salty ocean. It was probably an ancient ocean world, and this asteroid is just a messenger carrying on its history. It's also possible that asteroids just like this are what brought life to Earth in the first place.
Think about what she's saying. The scientific evidence is that the Bennu asteroid came from an ancient watery world, and that it is telling the story of that ancient, and she means millions, billions of years old. Well, the science is right. That asteroid did come from a watery world with life on it. It's just not so ancient. It's about 6,000 to 10,000 years old from the creation event. And so, again, scientists that are looking through their glass, their fogged glasses of evolutionary millions and billions of years, they can't see the obvious that's staring them in the face. The life planet jettisoned the material into space. Now, this is I'm taking, this picture is off the 7th edition. This page picture is the 7th edition of Dr. Brown's book, printed in 2001. On page 204, you'll see the prediction number 25 there. You can't read it. In 2001, he predicted spacecraft landing on a comet or asteroid, I'll throw in here, will find that comets, asteroids, contain LOS, which is, explained in the Mammoth chapter, and trace amounts of vegetation and bacteria, and about twice the salt concentration of our oceans. You're going to find minerals and things that came from a salty, watery world, because that's where it came from. And you're going to see nucleotides. You're going to see amino acids, trace amounts of vegetation and bacteria. Predicted it. And actually, that prediction goes back to 1999, because I had some copies that were from his PDF of the website in 1999 that added the comet and asteroid chapter before it was published in 2001. This prediction is coming back in every single space probe sent to collect material. And this is what the secular Big Banger evolutionists said. A surprise in NASA's asteroid rocks hints Bennu came from an ocean world. We spent over $1 billion to get the scientific evidence to support Dr. Brown's prediction of 26 years ago, 25 years ago. All scientists work for Dr. Brown. And look at these boulders. This is a relatively close-up picture, that big rock in the center. This rock right here is 24 feet in diameter. So, but still, you look at this big rocks, little rocks, dust in here. This loosely held together rock pile, rubble pile. What the team found was water-soluble magnesium sodium phosphate in mottled stones, a mineral no one expected except for HPT advocates. Phosphate compounds are key for all known life forming the backbone of DNA. And again, another picture of a rock pile from a different vantage point. That last one was on the south pole of Bennu. This is a picture of the foot of the OSIRIS-REx probe that went down to touch the asteroid and grab material from the asteroid to bring back to Earth. They almost lost their $1 billion space probe because they thought they were going to hit a solid asteroid. And because it's so loosely held together, it was like falling into... it was so soft, it didn't stop the foot when it hit and the whole OSIRIS-REx space probe almost sunk into Bennu before the rockets lit off to then take it away from Bennu. So almost lost it because they didn't know. But again, quoting from the article, the presence and state of phosphates along with other elements and compounds on Bennu suggests watery past for the asteroid, said principal investigator. Yeah, it came from Earth, a watery world. Prediction number 40, this is in the 9th edition, asteroids are rock piles. And it said this in the 7th edition too. Often with internal ice acting as a weak glue. Large rocks that began the capture process are near the centers of the asteroid. And again, the capture process is the large rocks had the gravity to pull the other rocks and debris and dust together along with the help of the aerobraking of the atmosphere that was with them. 4 years after publishing this prediction in 2001, they began to see that, yep, that's what we see with OSIRIS. And we've seen it on every single asteroid comet that we've gone to. And now we're going to define terms. You know, a asteroid is a single body. If it's small enough and spinning super fast, it's a solid rock asteroid. If it's big and it's not spinning fast, it's a rock pile. But it's just its own rock pile. If it has a moon, which this picture, it's hard to tell, this is the first time they ever saw a moon. Binary asteroid Ida with a moon. It shocked them. Figure 183 in Wall's book. Finding an asteroid with a moon was shocking to scientists at the time. Now more than 620 asteroids are known or suspected to have moons. So they were shocked because they can't explain how an asteroid can have a moon. Well, now they have 620 examples of not being able to explain it. And they still can't explain it to this day. They try and we'll get more into that when we get into the details when we come back to the asteroid chapter later on in the future teachings. So now this is an asteroid. So this was an asteroid, and this was a moon of the asteroid. But then this moon of the asteroid came and touched this asteroid and became what they call a contact binary asteroid. And this also defies explanation except for the hydroplate theory, which again, those two, a body with a moon, if there's an atmosphere still around that body and that moon, it's going to keep on slowing down the moon in its orbit around the other body, the other asteroid, and it's going to slow down until it just touches together and becomes a contact binary. There are dozens and dozens of peanut-shaped contact binaries that have been found, and they couldn't even explain it the first time, and they can't explain it today. They try to. We'll explain that later on. So and they know they were different because one has a higher density than the other one. And this is what Dr. Donald Yeomans of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory said about finding this first contact binary. It's a major mystery how two objects, each the size of skyscrapers, could collide without blowing each other to smithereens. This is especially puzzling in a region of the solar system where gravitational forces would normally involve collision speeds of 4,500 miles an hour. It's like in the vacuum of space, two objects that are traveling through space, the chances that they're going to be going at the same velocity, the same trajectory to even come together is like zero. And so how in the world did they come together without blowing each other up at a time where stuff flying through space is usually passing each other at thousands of miles an hour? How did this happen? The very first one, how could this ever happen? And now they have dozens of them. The mystery is solved when one understands that water vapor and aerobraking in weightless outer space gently merges the material into comets and asteroids. And I will say, when I talked to Dr. Christina Thomas in Northern Arizona University, I told her, you guys can't explain all this stuff. She didn't disagree with me. And I said, but I'm here to give you just one piece of information that would solve all the mysteries that you have, that you can't explain, And when I get done telling you, you're going to agree with me. And so I told her, I told her this last sentence: the mystery is solved when you understand that the bodies, that the comets, the asteroids, the TNOs at one time had an atmosphere that allowed the slowing down of the debris to come together into loosely held together rock piles. And I said to her, because she's the head of the DART project, I said, for example, the DART mission went to hit the moon, Dimorphos, of the asteroid parent body, Didymos, and had Didymos and Dimorphos kept their atmosphere longer, before the solar wind swept it away, then Dimorphos would have slowed down to become a contact binary with Didymos. And she's sitting in her chair in her office in Northern Arizona University, and as associate professor, MIT graduate PhD. She looked up and she goes, "You're right. That last paragraph solves all the enigmas in space, but they can't let their mind realize, well, how did it get an atmosphere? How could that have happened?" Well, they didn't read Genesis 7:11 and 12. They didn't read their Bible. They don't have a very reliable source to tell them how it happened. So she now has Dr. Brown's 9th edition. Sent it to her. She told me she received it. She said she would look at it when I sent it to her. I hope she has. And I was very thankful that she let me stick my head in her office and without any appointment or anything, and talk about these things back in the end of April here, 2026. I wanted to point out that these Lagrange points, which are also an enigma, and they can't understand why there's more asteroids on the L4 leading Lagrange points than the following, and I'm not going to try and explain it, except they want to send a Lucy probe. They've launched a probe to go visit some of these asteroids caught in these gravity wells, and I want to call them gravity wells, it's similar, that are in front of and behind Jupiter's orbit. And it's going to arrive to the first Trojans in 2027. But before it arrived, it went, and on the way, it went by a regular asteroid to take a picture of this asteroid that was on its way. And this asteroid right here is called Dinkinish. And when they thought it was just a solid asteroid, but as they were when they took a picture of it at A here, it looked like this. Wow, it has a moon. Shock. Another asteroid with a moon, which they can't explain. And then when it gets over to B, it takes another shot at Dinkinish and it sees this. Here's Dinkinish with a moon that is a contact, that they say is a contact binary. And they cannot explain Dinkinish moon being a contact binary. They can't even explain Dinkinish with a moon. And this is what their article said. Strange moon of asteroid Dinkinish is weirder than thought after NASA probe finds a contact binary. We never suspected anything so bizarre. And, well, there it is. And when I was talking to Dr. Thomas, I told her, I go, I don't even think that's a contact binary. In fact, you, the audience, can help me. If I see black between those two moons, that means they're two moons that are really close, but not even in contact. And that is even more shocking. I mean, that is beyond crazy, shocking, except for hydroplate theory advocates, because they got really close, but then they lost their atmosphere. And so they're staying only really close because they can't slow down the relative motion because they're in the vacuum of space. NASA's Lucy images reveal asteroid Dinkinish to be surprisingly complex. The researchers think some of the material in the disk disk being the moon, formed the moon Salem, which is actually two objects. It's a contact binary, they say, touching each other, a configuration called a contact binary. Details of how this unusual moon formed remain mysterious. And it will remain mysterious until they embrace the hydroplate theory explanation for how asteroids came about. They will never, by the laws of physics, there is no way to explain it if they've always been in the vacuum of space. The only way to explain it is they had an atmosphere. And HPT advocates not bother. Lucy findings can only be explained by HPT. Contact. So then we have a contact binary comet. 67P. It's called Comet 67P. And when before the space, they landed a space probe on it, but because it kind of fell over, it lost its solar energy to charge its battery, so it only took a few pictures found out there was over 15 complex organic molecules on the surface of 67P. And they also saw this, it looks like an impact crater that just punched a hole in this loosely held together rock pile. But if you look carefully, all those rocks there, they coined the phrase dinosaur eggs because they look like rounded off boulders, like they're a dinosaur egg or goosebumps in the crater. How does a comet form in the vacuum of space from the Big Bang with millions of goose egg, dinosaur, rounded off boulders? Absolutely impossible to explain. Hydroplate theory has no problem. All those rounded off boulders were being jettisoned from the fountains of the great deep at escape velocity, bashing into each other and rounding off and becoming this large comet. And then we'll just end this episode. We have more to go that we'll pick up next week. But we'll end this episode with something that all the detractors of Walt Brown over the years, they ignore Walt Brown's evidence versus theories on almost all of his chapters. So people have a theory that comets came from exploded planets between Mars and Jupiter, and it really applies to asteroids too. The exploded planet theory for asteroids and comets, or from eruptions on a giant planet, or for comets, the Oort cloud, never seen, never will be seen, it doesn't exist. But they have made up this idea of an Oort cloud where all these comets are sitting out there way past where we can see them, and every once in a while something comes by and throws a comet our way so that we can see it in our solar system. That's dealt with in the comet chapter. Revised Oort cloud became they began near the edge of the solar system because they knew that the original Oort cloud is broken, so they made the revised one, or that they came from meteor streams or from interstellar dust. And then you look down, and any red means over here the theory has severe problems with this item. It can't explain the formation. None of them can explain the formation. And yellow is exploded planet. And the reason why, if you look, this one has less red, some green, and some yellow. Because in a way it's partially right. Because the asteroids and comets did come from an explosion on a planet, but not the explosion of the planet. And that's why there's some green in here. But only the hydroplate theory has all green except for near parabolic comets, and we'll come to that when we get to the comet chapter. And everything else is green. The hydroplate theory explains everything that we find in space about comets. Although Walt doesn't have a table dedicated to asteroids, everything we're finding on asteroids, every single one is green. Now, not that it's in a table, but any item that you find out, you discover that we found out or discovered by space probes, telescopes, anything about asteroids, is that they're all green. And yet, evolutionary scientists reject the thought that maybe God was right when he said the fountains of the great deep burst up and the windows of heaven were open and it rained 40 days, 40 nights, water continued, and the windows of heaven were open. To me, that was God implying, I'm sending stuff up into space. I'm going to send it up into space. And now with all these probes, we're spending billions of dollars and the scientist is looking and saying, wow, what we just found can only be explained by that flood of Noah. But I can't accept that, because then I'd have to believe in Jesus. So I would rather stick with my God of time and chance. And I hope you are not one of those. I hope that you realize the evidence is beyond. I was talking to somebody this morning for breakfast, and his sister is so rejecting his message of what it takes to be saved because she just wants to believe in science. Because science has proved that book, she says, that book, why should I believe that book? It disagrees with science. No, it's the other way around. Science is proving that book to be reliable, trustworthy, and told us the truth of what happened with our origins. And I hope if you're wanting to truly humble yourself and have a relationship with the God who created the heavens and the earth and did bring a judgment with the flood, as I mentioned last week, and he's bringing another judgment. And the other judgment appears, and we'll cover this next week, it appears to include asteroids coming and hitting the earth, or comets. Something comes with a fire behind it, and it destroys things on the earth. There's a judgment, a fire coming upon this earth. And the big judgment is when we die, we either die in our sins, and we're separated from our Creator forever because we didn't humble ourselves and just acknowledge Him as God. That's the real problem that we hope every listener to this HPT University podcast effort, I hope you'll humble yourself and just say, God, forgive me a sinner, and I want you to be the Lord of my life. I did it 52 years ago, never looked back. I hope you will too. God bless you, and hope to see you next week in our next podcast.
Thank you for viewing this episode of Hydroplate Theory University. We hope you'll return for future episodes. Please like and subscribe, spread the word, and be sure to visit creationscience.com, where you can find more great hydroplate resources.